Hi, everybody. My name is Bob Goodwin, and welcome to another episode of Career Club's LinkedIn Live series. Very excited about today's program. So if you're not familiar with Career Club, we are using proven sales methods and tools to help people find careers that matter to them. And want to say that this is a live event. So if you've got questions or comments for our guest, Julie Elberfeld, who I'll introduce a little bit more in a minute, please use the chat feature. We would love to feature some questions while we're going through our discussion. I also want to make sure that I say, as always, thank you to my colleague, Heather Zinzer, who is the magic behind making this happen today. So, Heather, thank you for that. And with that, I'd like to welcome our guest, Julie Elberfeld, as we talk about diversity in tech. So, Julie, welcome.
Thank you, Bob. Glad to be here.
No, I'm so excited about our topic today. Before we jump into that, we have a little bit of a tradition here where we like to have a couple of icebreakers to help people get to know you a little bit. So where were you born and raised, Julie? Where are you from?
I am originally from Wabash, Indiana, a little tiny town of 10,000 people up in the north part of Indiana. I lived there for 10 years, and then my family started moving around. We lived in Chicago, Cincinnati. Ultimately, I graduated from high school down in Louisville, Kentucky.
Awesome. And where do we find you today?
I'm in Westchester, Ohio, just north of Cincinnati.
Just north of Cincinnati. Awesome. Mm-hmm. And then where did you go to school?
I went to Miami University, the one in Ohio. I think people often get that confused and call that Miami of Ohio. It's just Miami University, but up in Oxford, Ohio.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful campus, isn't it?
It is. Love this, especially this time of year. Spring there is just beautiful.
And so just a little bit about your family.
I'm married. My husband, Bob, and I live here in Westchester. I have 3 grown children of my own, and my husband also has 2. So we have a family of 5 adult children. We have 5 grandsons between the 2 of us, ranging from 21 years old all the way down to a 15-month-old.
So. Awesome. Well, holidays sound like they would be fun. Holidays and vacations sound like a good time at your house.
Yeah, for sure.
Just a little bit, Julie, we'll get into this more, but just a little bit about your career arc. Where you've kind of been in your career, please?
Yeah, sure. I was actually a math major at Miami, and I had the good fortune when I got out of school to be offered the opportunity to learn to code by Fifth Third Bank here in Cincinnati, and that's going to be material to the conversation. So, and so that was unexpected pathway for me, but really changed my life entirely. And then I ended up staying in the tech field. My entire career. I was in tech for about 34 years. And I was ultimately the divisional CIO at Fifth Third for commercial banking, and then went over to Capital One in 2010 as their divisional CIO for commercial banking. And then I got very involved in diversity inclusion, which is what leads us to this topic today. Back in 2014, and I did that with sort of side of desk while I was divisional CIO until I realized it was just ultimately what I was really most passionate about. And Capital One was really engaged and really serious about the diversity challenge. And they allowed me then as a senior executive to spend 50% of my job leading our diversity work in the tech organization there. That was a organization of 10,000 people. So it was a big role that I had there. And then I ended up leaving there 2 years ago to pursue this passion on a more full-time basis. So now I'm doing some advising to senior executives on diversity inclusion and working with some nonprofits who are in this space of trying to change the outcomes for people and get them opportunities to get into technology.
Wow. Well, again, I think you were country before country was cool. You've been doing this topic for a very long time and are clearly an expert in it and passionate about it. And I think we definitely share that in common. And then just real quickly, where do we find you when you're not doing work stuff? Sounds like family would be a big part of it, but what are you interested in or passionate about outside work stuff?
I always have to have some sort of creative outlet. I love doing interior design work. I'm happen to be building a house right now down in Florida. So that's kind of where I'm spending a lot of my time, is just designing things for the new house. I love to bike. I'm a cyclist, and my husband and I actually had our first date. We rode a bikes together on our first date. And we love to travel. So we have unfortunately not gotten to do a lot of that the last couple of years, but we have traveled in all over the United States and internationally. So we really love to travel.
That's cool. So you and I met through an organization called Perscolas, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. But the general theme is around diversity in technology. And what I thought we could do with our conversation today, and to kind of help people get grounded sort of for the structure of today's call, is if you could start talking just a little bit about some data around the scope of the issue around diversity, specifically in technology, and maybe even define diversity, what you mean by that. Mm-hmm. And then from there, just after we've laid out the facts, talk a little bit about why it's important, why it matters. As I think about why does it matter to individuals? Why does it matter to communities? Why does it matter to companies? Mm-hmm. And a little bit just about the import of the topic. Mm-hmm. And then for the last segment, what I thought maybe we could do is talk about, well, if all that's true, and now you've got me convinced that this is an issue worth addressing, as a company, as someone who's hiring talent, how should I be thinking about this? What steps can I start to take to have a positive impact on the diversity topic, particularly in technology? Does that sound fair?
It does. We don't have all day, right? Because I could talk about it that long, but we'll touch on those things.
We've had enough conversations beforehand. I think we could both talk about this all day. So just to get folks level set, maybe if you could just lay some groundwork on the problem from a data perspective, and it's just some numbers.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to step back a little bit, and then I'll give you some data. I think I'm going to make an assumption that people don't appreciate this problem at all, because I find that there are people in the tech industry themselves that don't appreciate not only what it's like today, but how much it has changed. So, I think it's important to just sort of say at the grassroots level, we are in a digital revolution. Technology is mattering to all of us, and we'll get into a little bit more of that about why this matters. But it's so impactful, yet the people that are creating technology that is impacting all of our lives do not represent the general population. Women, for example, only make up 25% of the tech industry. They are over 50% of all workers, but they're only 25% of tech. People of color. So typically when we talk about that in the tech space, we talk about Black, African American, Hispanic, and Indigenous people are only represented in tech at about 13%. You might wonder why I didn't mention Asian people that we typically categorize in people of color. And that's because the Asian population in technology, particularly South Asian, is fairly well represented overall. Now, I will say they are not represented well in leadership. And so there still needs to be a lot of focus on opportunity for the Asian people in technology as well. And I think it's also important to even look at like college graduation rates. So today, the tech industry tends to hire from computer science majors, particularly out of large institutions, research universities. And the graduation rate is also extremely low. Women are graduating about 19% of computer science graduates, women of color, like less than 5%. Wow. And, people of color overall at a very low rate compared to their overall graduation rate. So I think, women make up like over 58% of all bachelor's degrees, 18 to 19% of computer science degrees. And so even amongst the STEM fields, the computer science graduation rates are about as low as any other degree in the STEM field. And so I think that's, really framing the problem around we have an industry that is hugely impactful, yet there's a really low representation. And I think that, we'll talk about why this matters, but I think it's also important to know that there's a huge inclusion issue and a huge cultural issue, because there's been a lot of research that shows that the leaver rate, the attrition rate for women of all races and for men of color is over double what it is for white men. And so even after people are getting the education and getting into the field and progressing in their career, they ultimately decide to leave. And that research has shown that reason for leaving is not, for example, for women, to stay home. That's part of it, right? They get to childbearing age and they decide to stay home, but that's only 20% of the reason they're leaving. The other 80% of the women were leaving because of cultural reasons, not being able to realize their career objectives, not feeling like they see themselves in leadership, feeling like there were just a lot of microaggressions against them. And so I think it's important to understand that this problem is also not just a pipeline problem of who's going into tech, but also that there's a cultural issue in the technology industry that is driving people away once they're there. And I think, oh, yeah, go ahead.
No. Well, first of all, I want to remind people that this is a live. So if you've got questions or comments as we go, and please understand, we need to be judicious with, all the comments and stuff. But if you do have a question or comment, you're more than welcome to chime in. So we've got women represented at less than half their percent in the general population, right? Of computer science degrees. You anticipate something I was going to ask you about, because my understanding was STEM as a whole, women do very well in STEM actually, but in computer science, not so much. Right. 18% of the graduates are getting CS degrees, which is mind blowing. But then it really kind of bridges into the next thing that you were talking about, which is even when they get that far through, they don't stay, right? Because they're for whatever reason, but not whatever, for the reasons you outlined, not feeling welcomed, or that this is an environment for someone like me.
That's right. And that's what really galvanized me to the work, Bob, was because this was so different than my own experience. And so I was really, quite honestly, caught off guard back in 2014 when I really started to understand what was happening, because it hadn't been my experience. I started in this industry in the late 80s, and I was very much welcomed in. I mean, I was offered the opportunity to learn to code and become a software engineer. But women were 40% of the industry at that time, and they were 37% of technology-related computer science type degrees. So we don't expect that. We don't expect these kinds of things to happen where we're going backwards. And I think it's important to look at that, because it gives us some clues into why it has happened and what we might be able to do about it. And so I think people often ask me, well, how did this happen? Why did this happen? Right. Yes. I think when you and I first talked, it was one of your questions, like, what? How did this happen? We went backwards. And I think, when you look at what has happened, it really started to pivot in the 90s when the personal computer came on the scene. Like, when I started in tech, I didn't even really know what it was. I knew about NASA and I knew about, things like that. But somebody said, you should learn how to code computers. I'm like, okay, sounds cool to me, but I didn't really understand it, at that kind of level, because it wasn't in our face all the time like it is now, right? So in the 90s, when the personal computer was introduced, the advertising was almost entirely targeted at men and boys. And so you look back, and I have some slides that I use when I do presentations that just show ad after ad after ad. And, the prevalence of white men and boys in these ads is astonishing. And even to the degree that women are seen in the ads, like looking, over the shoulder of their husband, or they're, like, oh, they're so enamored by the person using the computer. And then you look at the software that was introduced, right? It was financial services. It was how to manage your finances, and then a bunch of gaming, right? That you think about the gaming industry and how masculine the games were that were first put out for the computer, right? And so that started to create a narrative that was transcended into Hollywood. You think about all the movies that came out about technologists and the nerdy profile of the technologist who was the boy genius. And so this whole cultural element of what it was like to be a person that was actually into the computer was not looking like people like me, even though at the time I was in the field creating some of the first internet banking applications in our country. And so we started to create this stereotype. And then a couple other big things happened. In the 2000s, you had the dot-com bust in the early 2000s. And then by the mid 2000s, there was a ton of outsourcing of software engineering jobs offshore. mostly to India. And so people started to think like, well, there aren't any jobs in the United States to do technology. And so we saw this mass exodus, quite honestly. Very few people actually going into computer science as a career choice. And then when there was a realization that, no, there really are a lot of tech jobs and people started to return to the tech jobs in the late 2000s, this stereotype issue and this cultural issue and this, programming culture and the boy genius culture had sort of driven women out. And so for women, despite the fact that they were well represented, this stereotype has played largely into why we see such a huge.
It's really interesting, Julie, because I'm slow to pick up on this, but if I'm hearing you right, it's when the kind of democratization of technology, it became more of a consumer thing, not just a B2B thing, and programming and COBOL and Fortran and way in the back room somewhere. But now it's video game consoles, mobile phones, personal computers. So these are consumer electronics, not business tools. That the marketing became very masculine and communicated, well, maybe this isn't for somebody like me. One of the other things, just real quickly, that I wanted you to touch on, if you could, is and this is more on the retention side, but what you were sharing with me around the quality of assignments that women were getting relative to their male counterparts and what role that's played in kind of the inclusion, belonging side of it. Yeah,
absolutely. I think you start to look at some of the practices that are driving women. And by the way, I talk about women a lot, but I always want to echo the fact that women of color are the least represented in tech and people of color overall. And so these paradigms apply. Now, the history isn't the same. So the history for people of color is the lack of access, lack of role modeling, lack of insight that this is even a career opportunity. So there's always been a lack of representation of people of color. So just make sure that I say that, because that's a huge passion of mine. I don't want this to be, a women or white women's problem. It is far deeper than that. But when you start to peel the onion on like what is happening, we see women aren't making it to leadership as often. Well, if they're not getting to leadership as often, they're probably not getting the same rate of promotion. So we see that. And you say, well, why are they not getting at the same rate of promotion? And one of the things that I've been seeing in some of my work is that they don't get the same quality of assignment. So there are certain assignments that we value. And typically at the lower end, in the more entry levels of technology, we care about people's coding skills or technical skills, depending on whether they're a coder or they're in the network side or in cyber. And if you don't get a quality assignment where you're allowed to demonstrate those skills, then you may be overlooked for a promotion, and then that cycle starts to occur. Yep. And unfortunately, women get pigeonholed into stereotypical roles. They're asked to be the communicator, the project manager, the person to put the decks together to talk about the project. And so because they end up in these stereotypical roles, then they're not developing the same skills that then are ultimately rewarded in the promotion process. Yeah, so that assignment is hugely important.
No, it makes a ton of sense. We've got a really interesting question. And if you want to say, Bob, we'll get to that in a few minutes. That's totally cool. But Scott Mayo, thank you. Says, love the topic. And thank you, Bob and Julie. You're welcome. Question. With the advancement of low code and digital transformation, would you consider the barrier of entry into the IT world lower than 15 years ago? And if so, the need for 4-year CS degrees no longer the standard to be successful? Well, I know the answer to that question. I know you know the answer to that question.
And I know Scott does too. Thank you, Scott. He's a huge fan of Scott and the work he's doing.
Do you want to hold on to that one for a minute, or you want to go with it?
I'm gonna definitely get to that. So okay. Thank you, Scott, for
thank you, Scott. It's a great question, and it's very, very on point, I think, around the solution to this. So if we can agree that the numbers support, this is a problem, that this does not represent society, this doesn't offer what looks like paths to really rewarding careers. What is some of the impact of the data that we're seeing, again, whether it's on individuals, community / society at large, and then on companies as well?
Yeah. So let's talk about why it matters. I mean, it's funny because, Bob, I was asked honestly and academically early in my work and back in 2014, why do you care about this so much? Does it really matter? Like, okay, so what? The field is largely men, largely white and Asian men. Does that matter? There are a lot of fields that are, teachers are largely women, and so
Right.
Does it really matter? And I had to really examine that question truthfully and honestly for myself. And I will tell you that I feel as if I find reasons that it matters like constantly now, because it's like my insight is up and I'm looking for it. But I like to frame it this way to start out. I said at the beginning of the conversation, right? Technology really matters to all of us. This is not just a tech industry issue. This is a everybody issue. It impacts everything about our lives. Like, technology is in many ways in control of our lives, right? I mean, we in some ways that's a great thing. In some ways it's a harmful thing, but it really truly is part of our everyday lives. And so now you have the group of people who are dreaming up the new ideas and creating new solutions don't represent the general population. And the reality is, as humans, we're biased. And so when you have a group of people that don't represent the population and you don't have women and people of color at the table in equal numbers, you just are going to make mistakes. I mean, there's all kinds of research that shows that diverse teams are more innovative, they're better at problem solving. And gosh, it seems like you'd want that in the tech space, right? But we're already seeing the impact. Like, there are mistakes being made. This bias is creeping into technology solutions. I mean, I like to talk about a really simple one because people can get their head around it, and that is in facial recognition, right? Like, we've all used software now that's starting to identify us, and it's used extensively in the criminal justice system. Well, that has been proven that commercially developed software, put out by major tech companies, didn't recognize people with dark skin effectively, misidentified their gender, all kinds of problems. And now you've got, the criminal justice system using the software, and we already, know some of the challenges in the criminal justice system. And now you add in software that's very biased. And when you look at the root cause of it all, because that's been done, it really was about what they fed the algorithms. They fed the algorithms a lot of faces to train it. And guess what? 80% of the faces were white. That does not represent the population as a whole, right? And so if you teach the algorithm that people look like you and I, then people with dark skin are not going to be recognized by the software, and it has massive impact. And you just have to say, like, if there'd been a more diverse group of people sitting at the table, wouldn't they have said, like, hey, this software isn't even recognizing me? Right. And, you would have had different outcomes. And so I think, like, we should all care that the people that are making software that's managing, controlling, affecting our lives in so many dimensions don't represent the whole population. But what really hooked me, Bob, was the fact that technology has today, in first quarter of this year, there were 1.1 million tech jobs opened. That's up 40% over last year as we were recovering from the pandemic. This is going to continue to grow because we are in a digital economy, right? Every company has realized, even more so through the pandemic, how important the digital economy is. And so 1.1 million open jobs. The jobs are high-paying jobs. They're 13 of the top 25 highest-paying jobs are in technology. And so if you don't create access for women of all races, for men of color, to some of the highest paying, most future-proof jobs, you are creating a socioeconomic challenge that we already have in our society and is just going to continue to progress. However, if we solve the problem, if we put our hat, the positive hat on, like, oh, this is not a good situation, but we think about it from the other lens, solving this problem. Think about the individual who I'll never forget Bob's story of a young woman who I was actually visiting a Perscolis boot camp up in New York City in the Bronx in New York. And she was explaining to me the impact that it was having for her to have had this opportunity to learn to code and end up in a tech career. And she said, it's going to change my life. It's going to change my family's life generationally, but it is changing my whole community because people around me look at what I'm doing and saying, it's possible to do something that is going to change our circumstance. And she's like, it's giving our community hope that we can, in fact, have some of these jobs that are going to change the socioeconomic situation of our
Julie,
family.
I mean, I'm sorry, like that to me is like the center of the center of the center of this whole thing is hope. And thank you for laying it out the way you just said it. And I'm going to repeat it because I believe it so much, is individuals' lives are being changed. That in and of itself is sufficient good. That people can go have, and Jay Dierig is on this call. And Jay, thank you for joining and all you do at Perscolas. But Jay talks about not living wages, but thriving wages. And where it's what I think the number is 125, 25% higher than the median income for where you live. So the individual, they're learning stuff, as you say, these are future-proof skills, and that in and of itself is good. To your point, that affects their families. Well, now all of a sudden we can have a better life, whatever that means to that family, whatever a better life looks like for them. But then, as you say, that extends to the community because now that's a role model that says, hey, that's a path for me. Mm-hmm. And as we look at generational poverty, this is a super highway lane to get out of generational poverty and really reroute important large segments of society that have not been presented with these opportunities previously.
Absolutely. And I mean, this, I was starting to get a little teary, in fact, myself, because this is really at the root of it, right? And by the way, these are really fun jobs. There's such a breadth of jobs in technology. So it's not like, oh, let's just chase the dollar. I mean, these are really good, fun jobs where you can make a huge impact. It's technologies in every industry, every sector, whether you like fashion or you like banking or, it's in every healthcare, it's in every sector. And I think that's the thing is like our society hasn't recognized this as the job that it is. By the way, you don't have to be a doctor, right? People in technology are making as much or more than doctors and not going to school for 10 years and, accumulating massive amounts of debt. And so I think it's important to just understand this is a great career path and we need more people to understand that. But then we also have to look at, this cultural challenge that I talked about earlier as well.
So being a little bit mindful of the time, let's first of all, Grace, I don't know if you saw this, but Grace Kuhn, former colleague of yours, says hello. And, let's make sure that we talk about this. And this might be at the, a little bit more towards the end about what can I do now? But, Grace is asking, how do I, help mentor and guide students to choose tech careers, right? And, in front of local schools, groups, and in her sphere of influence, which, Grace, I mean, that's such a great question for you to be asking because we all have our spheres of influence. And thank you for being intentional about using yours. If we start to think about this from I'm an employer, and you asked the question earlier, why should I care? Go be a nurse, go do something else. There's lots of jobs out there. As an employer, and maybe getting really commercial about the whole thing, if I'm the CFO of a company, why do I care about this?
I just wrote
this is all soft-hearted, and I got teary-eyed too. No, I live in the land of spreadsheets if I'm the CFO.
Yep.
Tell me why I should care about this.
Yeah. I've often said that, I would like to win the hearts and minds of people, which we just worked on. But I also want people to appreciate that this is an absolute business imperative. I just mentioned 1.1 million jobs were opened in the technology industry. There was just an article in the Wall Street Journal that tech salaries are up 20%, up 30 to 40% in some communities. That's good for the tech worker. It's not good for the company. I mean, the pace of growth of tech salaries is far outstripping other jobs within companies. And so CFOs are adding 20% to their IT budget and getting nothing more for it. And yet there is just a huge hunger for talent in the tech industry because of the need for digital capabilities, because companies are so dependent on technology. And yet every tech executive I have talked to in the last few months, Bob, has said to me, yeah, we have an initiative going where we're trying to figure out where and how we're going to find technology talent. And we're going to get to this question that Scott asked in a moment here, I think. But I think that's why you care, right? As a company, I mean, you should care that you have diverse teams who are, building better solutions and giving you the best possible representation of society so that you're building the best digital capabilities for them. But you also need to care because people are just not finding the talent that they need to be able to fill these jobs. And as a result of it, the salaries are going up and up and up. And at some point, it's just too much. It's just not sustainable. And so, I think there are a lot of reasons companies should care. And by the way, how do we come back to the diversity question? Okay, well, let's just go find more men to go into tech. Well, at some point, you just are kind of going to run out of the people who, would be interested in going into this space. If you continue to lock out, not welcome, not create an environment that's appealing for women of all races and for men of color, you're going to lose this battle, right? We have to look at other pipelines of talent. The CS degree pipeline is not helping us, right? We talked about just the sheer numbers. There are only 90,000 people graduating with a CS degree. 90,000 does not fill 1.1 million jobs.
Well, and two, the shelf life of current technology, what would you peg that at?
3 to 5 years. 3 to 5 years. So yeah, people need to be reskilled every 3 to 5 years in technology anyway. It's changing so rapidly. And so yeah, the half-life of tech skills is about 3 to 5 years now. So
what's the big unlock here, Julie? What's the, at least, and maybe it's too simplistic to say that there's one answer to this. That's probably not a true statement. But what do you believe the key area that employers are overlooking that starts to tick all these boxes?
Okay, we're going to answer Scott's question now.
Yes.
This cultural problem has to be addressed, and we could talk deeply into that, right? But we really have to look at alternative pathways. The traditional method of, I think, and when I say traditional, I'm going to say traditional for the last 20 years. I was more typical. I didn't have a computer science degree. I had a math degree. There weren't computer science degrees in the 70s, right? Very few schools were offering a computer science degree. So historically, we didn't require people to have a CS degree. The early software engineers were all women from typically accounting departments. Bookkeepers and accountants were considered to have the mind to be a software engineer, and they were the early software engineers. So I think we have to go back to our roots a little bit. And so I've been doing some work the last couple of years with an organization called Opportunity at Work. And Opportunity at Work has identified that one of the most critical factors in whether or not you get access to a middle or high wage job, and this is absolutely true in the tech industry, like maybe more so than anywhere else, is whether or not you have that 4-year bachelor's degree. There are 70 million Americans, only 40% of Americans have a college degree. So there are, 60% of Americans out there without a college degree, 70 million Americans. They're developing skills, they're working, they're active in the workforce, but they're shut out of good paying jobs because 75% of jobs in the last decade have required a college degree. And so Opportunity at Work is really looking at people who are skilled through alternative routes called STARS, which is a great acronym that helps you just realize that these are stars. They're not the exception. There are millions of them, and they're skilled through alternative routes. They've learned. They're learners. Because you just mentioned it, the half-life of tech skills is 3 to 5 years. What you really need are learners. You don't need people that, look, it's great that we have some people with CS degrees that can get in and do a lot of the really deep algorithmic kind of technology. But as Scott was mentioning in his question, there's so much low code, configuration, things that are more logical thinking skills, robotic process automation. There are a lot of opportunities to do jobs today that aren't that deep algorithmic coding. We have some of that, and we need the people that do that. But there are so many types of jobs in technology where people can learn at, a boot camp like Perscolis, who, you and I both love, as giving people an opportunity to break into the tech industry through learning skills, through a dedicated program for several weeks. But I think one of the, I'm just like, you got me on my motor going here. But one of the things I just have to say is that often the challenge is companies can't give up. They're addicted to the CS degree. They're addicted to the 4-year degree. And they're addicted to looking at organizations like Perscolis as a philanthropic opportunity. Well, I did my good deed. I hired 2 people out of this boot camp, and I'm helping my community. They need to look at that as a true source of talent. They have to move to a new lane and say there are tons and tons and tons of Americans out there, and they do happen to be more women and more people of color who have the skills and have just been locked out of this industry for all the reasons that we talked about. And if companies would just invest the billions of dollars that they are in fact investing in DEI programs in looking at these new lanes and opening up opportunity for stars and others who don't have that CS degree, maybe they have a 2-year degree, maybe they have some skills that they've learned through another job. We're not going to solve this problem if we don't look at these new alternative pathways. And
what are the objections or misimpressions or kind of calcified ideas that are preventing people from, because I'm the CFO and I've got 20% increase in wages, and that's just year on year. That's been compounded over however many years. So
Absolutely.
like they're actually doubling, over 7 years.
Oh, for sure.
Then what is the misinformation, the lack of information that they're holding companies back from embracing what really feels like an ocean of available talent?
I think there are a couple things. I think often we look at our own lives and we say, well, I got to go to college, and anybody that wants to go to college would go to college. And therefore, I'm just really going to be in this lane of believing that there's some magic to people that get to go to college, that they develop some skill, and it's an indicator of ability to learn or an indicator of motivation. And I think that's a misperception, right? It's easy for those of us who have had that opportunity to get in a lane of believing that's true for everyone today. I hear people say, doesn't everyone go to college? No, actually not. Only 40% of people in the United States have a bachelor's degree. And so we have this idea that everyone gets to go to college. I hear people say, well, I tried that and it didn't work. And at the same time, I say, well, what did you do to actually work with the organization like a Perscolis? Did you work with them? Did you say what you really needed? Did you talk about the skills you really needed? Did you work actively with them to make this a talent pipeline? Typically, the answer is no. And my frustration is I know a lot of these same companies are spending tens of thousands of dollars to recruit at universities, to onboard students from universities, to give them rotational programs for 2 years or 3 years where they're not really quite productive yet. They'll invest all that money. They're investing billions of dollars in diversity programs that aren't working. And then we'll kind of fall back on this. Well, I'm just a pipeline victim. If there were more women, if there were more people of color, I'd hire them. when they have the opportunity to be more proactive, to work with organizations like Scott's, like Perscullis, like organizations that are really out there trying to connect employers with people who do, in fact, have the skills and developing the skills and can develop the skills.
And then this is really great. That seems to address a lot of the front end on the recruiting bit. There's still the retention issue.
Absolutely.
Right. And what could companies be doing? What should companies be doing to, once we get them in the door, that it is a thriving environment to help people grow and stay and develop?
Yeah. I mean, I think awareness is huge, right? Know your data, know what's really going on, not just the data, but the sentiment. What is the sentiment of your employees? Do you, in fact, have, pockets of cultural issues? Are you really addressing it? Are you really acknowledging that the tech industry has, in fact, become a very masculine oriented field? Look, the reality is if 80% of the people around you are men, the culture is going to be masculine. And you have to be consciously working on the inclusion side of that. If 75% of the people are white, you have to realize that you have created a white culture, and you have to be thinking about the people who might not feel included in that culture. You have to work at this. This doesn't just happen. You can't just say, well, I have good values and therefore everything must be right in our organization. It just doesn't work out that way. You need to look at those assignments. Are assignments being given out equitably? Are people being given equitable opportunity for development and promotion? Because that lack of promotion at the same rate as their majority peers is one of the core reasons that people are leaving. Flexibility. One of the things that made this career amazing for me was it was flexible enough for me to be able to raise my 3 children, right? And I could work part-time sometimes, or I could work from home. We're all working from home now, which should make it even way more flexible. But flexibility, making sure that, you're giving people the opportunity to address the things in their lives that they need to be able to address at different points. I think these are the kinds of the practices that people need to look at. They need to look at their systems too. Like, what are your systems of promotion? What are your systems of hiring and sourcing? And often our biases are embedded in those systems. And then if you have to really break those down and look at them and understand what it is that you're really doing, and it has to start at the top. Executives have to be engaged in this work. Yes. And I think that's really, what makes this work. The difference that I've seen in organizations who actually make it happen and those who don't are whether or not their executive team is actually engaged and hasn't outsourced this work to their HR partner or some, organization. We often put this work on the back of the people who, in fact, we were trying to serve. So, they ask a junior group of women or a junior group of people of color to solve a problem, and then they don't support or engage. And when the executives engage, change actually happens.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point, because there's a potentially patronizing element to this of, okay, well, we'll go set off a little group of you people, go do that. Yep. And come back and, give us a little presentation, and we'll thank you, and we'll have lunch, and maybe we'll do something, but probably not. Yep. Versus, again, the reason that I'm so passionate about this, it makes good business sense and it makes good community sense.
Absolutely.
And I just really struggle to figure out why people aren't embracing this more. So to me, companies that start to figure this out are going to have a huge competitive advantage over the laggards who can't or won't figure this out, when it's actually to their benefit, which is really ironic. As I want to be mindful of time, I want to make sure that we address Grace's question. So she's saying that you guys work together at Capital One, and she's now in the twilight of her career. She'd like to mentor and guide students in these technology kinds of careers. How would you encourage her, just as an individual, she's not running some big company. How would you encourage her as an individual to make a difference?
I mean, it's go talk to the schools in your community, talk to the guidance counselors. There's some really interesting research that has been out just recently around what happened for 18 to 25-year-olds relative to how much they were encouraged or even told that there was this opportunity for a career in technology. And it is very sad news for someone who is so passionate about this work, because students I'm not going to remember the numbers right now, Bob, right off the top of my head, but it was an astounding number of people that were never told about a degree in technology, and then a huge number that were not encouraged. And of course, this also goes across gender and race and ethnicity lines on whether or not you were told and encouraged to consider a career in technology. And so I think people of us who are in this practice to go into the schools and talk to the guidance counselor and ask for career day opportunities or opportunities to speak in classes where they talk about careers, to go do projects with students. Unfortunately, computer science education is very much lacking in our country. And so, there are so many schools where kids are just never getting introduced to what it means to make technology, to be a builder. Yes. And so I think to take those skills into the community, I mean, we had a great program when I was at Capital One where we taught middle school kids how to code, hugely successful and really, a really meaningful opportunity for them to know that I don't just have to pick up this phone and play the games or play or use the apps, but I can actually build them. Yes. And that is, and to realize the change that you can make in the world as a builder of technology is so important, that we start to change that stereotype for kids and let them know that you can look like me and you can look like Grace and you can have an amazing career.
Yeah, and Felicia, thank you as well for the nice compliments. Yes, this is definitely an essential conversation. So as we kind of wrap this up a little bit, Julie, is there anything, first of all, that we haven't covered that you really want to make sure that we touch on?
I think we've done a great job of covering the topic. Like I said, I could probably talk all day. We could go a lot deeper into these various things, but I think we're good.
Okay, I'm more worried about my ability as a facilitator, and we actually did make time for something. If people want to learn more about the topic or how they can, have a positive impact, where would you steer them?
The topic is so broad, and it kind of depends on where your greatest interest is. There is this thing called Google search. I'll give a little plug to Google. You can, if you search diversity, inclusion, challenge, and technology, you will get a plethora of information. So if you just want the information, there are a lot of organizations out there that are doing research, like NCWIT, like ITSMF, iTech, AnitaB.org, on and on. There are a lot of women who code, Deaf Color, Lesbians Who Tech. There's a ton of organizations that are doing the research. To understand more about STARS, you could look at opportunityatwork.org. opportunityatwork.org. But I also think then if you're interested in these organizations like a Perscullis or a Year Up, or, there are a lot of them that are just local to communities, being supportive of these organizations who are helping people get on this path to a career in technology and change their lives is also a really great way to be a part of this conversation.
Yeah, I'll throw out a couple more ideas too. One is for people who are listening at your own company, like go engage with the CIO, CTO, CHRO, and say, hey, how can I be participating in something that makes a difference here? Yes. That's one. Two is I had the opportunity, I think anybody who's listening to our conversation today could contribute in a way. I had the opportunity a few weeks ago to go help mentor a Perscullis cohort on a Friday to teach them like interviewing skills, tell me about yourself, some resume ideas, just things that we might take for granted as some professional skills, having been in work for a little while. But go volunteer at one of these organizations and encourage people and share some of the things that you have learned, because it's very much appreciated by the students, by the learners, And I think that's something else that anybody can do if you just carve out the time, if this topic is important to you. Last question, Julie, if people wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way to contact you?
LinkedIn.
Okay.
I'm on LinkedIn message me. Happy to connect, happy to share more, happy to come help your organization if your executives want to learn more about how they could make a difference. But yeah, LinkedIn message is usually the best way to connect with me.
Okay. So I want to say again, thank you very much, Julie. A number of the folks listening today and watching today have said what an essential conversation this is. And I believe that is true as well. So I thank you for everything that you're doing to make a difference, to raise the visibility, but also providing the business rationale that this is not just a good thing to do, it's a smart thing to do for the business. As well as the community. So with that, thank you again, and appreciate your time and look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you so much, Bob. This is really great.
Thank you, everybody, for listening, and hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.